All right, we're in Esther 5 and 6 this morning. Esther 5 and 6. There are how many books in the Bible? 66. How many books in the Old Testament? 39? So 39, and that makes in the New Testament 27. And how many different, you can't math this morning? Math doesn't feel the same way about you, but it's all right. So there are three, you could say, main types or styles of books in the Old Testament. Do you know what those are? Ma'am?
No, that was another question. That was fake. I'm sorry.
All right. Historical is one. Prophetical is another. And think of Song of Solomon. Poetic. Historical, poetical, prophetical. There are three main types. Which do you think Esther is? Is it poetry? Is it prophecy? Not really. It's telling a story, so that makes it historical. So this is what you would call a historical narrative about Esther and who was the reigning world power at the time? Persia. Okay. And so the teens are in here today. Glad to have y'all. Here's my question to you. Have y'all heard the story of Esther? You know what it's about? Yep. Could you teach it for me? Everybody just smiled and got real red. So the idea, and here's the point of teaching. The Bible says, commit these things to faithful men that'll be able to teach others also. So the point of my teaching is not that it stops with you, but that it at least goes one person forward, right? So you put this in your mind and in your heart, and you bring it back up. When you have a daughter, you tell her about Esther. Now, or when you have a wife, you remind her about Esther, or whatever. When you're looking for a wife, you think about Esther. And so the point of these type of teaching is to encourage and exhort, but also the style of this teaching is expositional. Y'all know what that means? Ma'am? Verse by verse, usually. Okay. The key word in expositional is expose, right? So I don't come in here just bringing a story and then I go search for a verse that kind of matches it. I go, hey, we're going through Esther. That means, guess what I have to do? Study Esther, right? So I got to study Esther, and then I expose what's already in the text. I don't bring something new. So my job is to help expose the text. That's a mark of a church that wants to learn the Bible, is that it has expositional preaching. So this is all on purpose, by the way. The way that Pastor Chad preaches and I teach and preach is expositional. And if you notice, what did Pastor Chad speak on last week? Romans chapter 3. Guess what he's going to be speaking on this week? The rest of Romans chapter 3. So we're going through, and he's doing this on purpose, and it's really hard to do this because it's not what you always want to teach and preach on. But it is a way that you get the whole counsel of God, right? What if he just wanted to preach on America every week? Some pastors do that, okay? But what we're doing forces us to go study and expose what's in God's word. So we just so happen to be in Esther. I picked Esther because we're having a girl and we already did Ruth, so I figured I'd study on Esther and make sure I knew what was going on. So it's a beautiful book. However, it has no actual mention of who in it. No actual mention of God. God's name's not mentioned one time. It's the only book like that. And so, just as a review, Esther is set in the kingdom of Persia. The people of Israel had been exiled from their land and found themselves servants before Persia, to Babylon. Okay, and then Babylon got eaten up by Persia, and I used the illustration a couple weeks ago. The king of Persia, in Esther's name, is Ahasuerus. In history, if you read through history books, his name is Xerxes. Okay, so Xerxes, if you ever have seen pieces, and please don't just go watching this unless you have VidAngel. If you ever seen the movie 300, it's the battle where the Spartans fight at Thermopylae and they stop the Persians. But in the middle of that, this dude rolls up and he's wearing all these gold chains and golden underwear. And he's like being pulled by elephants and has this entourage like a mile long and all these crazy looking servants. And that's King Xerxes. And he was a wild man. Like, he was an angry man, and he was a power hungry man. There was how many territories that he ruled? 127. So was he powerful? Yes. Could you just go in and talk to him? No. So he was powerful, but he was also maniacal. He did some maniac type stuff. As a matter of fact, one of the bridges that his engineers had made broke, Dean, and because he was mad about that, he had all the engineers executed. And then he told some of his servants to get some whips and go down to the water that had broken the bridge and then whip the water as punishment. So, very wild dude. He had some crazy acts, and that's the king of the known world. And so we found out, and we did a lesson on the nationwide and worldwide beauty pageant, which Esther won. So we estimated that there was about 50 million people in his kingdom, and so that means about 25 million women, and she's the winner of them all. Okay? Winner. In air quotes. Did she get to pick her husband? Did she have a say in it? Nope. As a matter of fact, she was an orphan raised by Mordecai, her cousin, but old enough to be her uncle. Anybody got people like that in your family? I call my cousin uncle. But he's really my cousin, and I call my second cousin or whatever, I call them my cousin. Just because he was old enough to be my uncle. It's just how it worked. It's weird, I know. So that was kind of how it was. Mordecai raised Esther, and when she was chosen to go into this beauty pageant, he told her one thing, like one last piece of advice. Anybody remember what it was? Yes. Yeah, don't tell them who you're kin to, right? And so that has, so far, she hasn't told anybody. And so last week, we remembered and we read this verse that Esther may have been put into the kingdom for such a time as this. And then she makes this bold statement, one of the boldest in all of the Bible, and it's in verse, let's see here, 16. At the end of it, well, I'll read it. It says, "Go, gather all the Jews that are present at Shushan, which is the capital, and fast ye for me, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in according to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." In other words, I'm going to stick my neck out for all of our people. And if the king doesn't allow me to come into his presence and I get killed, then I get killed. That's pretty bold. Okay? And so we see the courage of Esther on display, and we think about, okay, what type of courage do we need? We need enough courage to share the gospel, right? Okay, you don't have to die first, but sometimes your pride has to die, and you have to go, hey, do you know Jesus? You know Jesus could change your life? And actually say the life-giving power and explain the life-giving power of the gospel. You're like, well, that sounds easy compared to if I die, I die. Right? But that is part of you dying to yourself. And explaining the gospel to the next person that needs it. So Esther's rise to queenship, obviously it was not by chance. God placed her in the palace for this time. And Mordecai, her cousin, refused to do something. Do y'all remember? Bow to a man named Haman. So Haman was basically the second in command, and he had the respect and authority of almost everybody in the kingdom, except one day when he walked by Mordecai, and Mordecai refused to bow to him, and that made him mad. So he hatched a sinister plot, and he didn't want to just kill Mordecai. He wanted to exterminate all the Jews. So, genocide. And so here we have, as we come into chapter 5, Esther's resolve in chapter 4. She chooses courage over comfort. And Esther's made her decision to go before the king to risk her life. Meanwhile, Haman, in his pride and hatred, continues to fester this morbid plot. So these chapters that we'll read in 5 and 6 and study really show a contrast. Pride and ego, right, versus fear of the Lord and courage. Okay? So we come to Esther chapter 5. What does courage look like when everything is on the line? Or maybe what does courage look like in my normal life? How should I be acting? So let's start with verses 1 and 2, Brother Bobby, if you don't mind.
It was so when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near, touched the top of the scepter.
All right. So here it sounds so easy, okay? But have you ever stood in front of something and all right, here we go, judgment's coming. I'm probably going to die. We probably haven't done that very often in our life, but here she was. This is really one of the most important parts of the story. She stands in front of the king. She enters into the inner palace, and one movement would either spare her life or cause her to be killed. And what is that movement? He moves his scepter towards her, allows her to come in. Incredible. So is there any mention of God in there? No, but does God show up? Absolutely. God's there all along. He's never not been there. He's never not been working. Verse 3 through 5, the king's response. Josh, you mind?
And said the king unto her, what wilt thou for me? What is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the hour of the Lord. Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king stay unto a banquet that I have prepared for him. Said, cause Haman to make haste that he may do as Esther hath said, so the king with that Esther hath.
All right, so we have a courageous entrance. She comes before the king, and then the king says, what do you want? Does she say, kill Haman? Haman's a bad guy. Nope, she says, do you mind if we have a small party and invite Haman in? And obviously Haman has a place because he is second in command. Perhaps she has something she wants to do. Perhaps she has some details that she wants to discuss. So this courageous entrance leads to a strategic invitation. So she says, hey, can we have a party and can we invite Haman? So the king and Haman come to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now, here's the perfect time. She could just, hey, king, I don't know if you know this guy, but he's evil. And he's trying to kill me. You think you could kill him for me? And then eradicate everything and undo everything. The problem is the motion that has been set in place by Haman is a motion that is not easily undone. So what was the motion?
On a certain day
Right. On a certain day, there's going to be a green light. There will be no retribution, and you can and are encouraged to take up arms and kill all the Jews. So you can exterminate them throughout the kingdom. Why? Well, because they don't exactly do the things that we want them to do, so let's get rid of them. Seems like this story's played out a few times during the history of the world. So, verse 6 and 7. Cullen, you mind?
And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy pension? And it shall be granted thee, and what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My pension and my request is.
Keep going to through verse 8.
If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my pension and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said.
All right, so here they are. They're sitting at this feast, and we know that the king liked to party and enjoy himself. He was doing that for some days and months early in the book. And so they sit down, and obviously the king thinks that the queen, Esther, has some sort of request for him. And it's true. She does. But for some unknown reason, because it's not explicit in here, she decides not to reveal exactly what she wants. Instead, she just kicks the can down the road a little bit. We would call this a suspenseful delay. And so she goes, hey, I know we're at a banquet, but can we do another one of these? And can Haman come to that one that I shall prepare for them, and I'll do tomorrow as the king hath said. So Esther doesn't get up in arms. She doesn't go crazy. She doesn't yell. She doesn't scream. She doesn't call for his head. She just says, hey, can you come to a banquet tomorrow? That's my request. Now, she could have asked for a little more, up to half the kingdom. That's what he said. I'll give you that. But instead, she just says, hey, could you meet with me one more time? So while Esther moves with humility and patience, there's a slight contrast between her and Mr. Haman. Okay, he couldn't be more prideful. So we see the arrogance of a prideful enemy in verses 9 through 14. So, have you ever been excited about going to something? Excited that you were invited to something? You know, I got little kids, so they're excited about everything. So, I mean, even going to the neighbor's house, they're overjoyed about. I think it's because Jace knows she can weasel some snacks out of Melissa. So they get super excited, and, you know, hey, we still need to act sane. So here's Haman, and he's come from a party, and he got invited back to a party. And here's how he acts, verses 9 through 11. Corbin.
Then we came forth that day, joyful with glad heart, when Haman saw me attack me. But he stood not up nor moved him. He was full of indignation. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself from sent and called for his friends and perished his life. Haman told them of the glory of the riches and food of his children, all things wherein the king had promoted. And now he had advanced of the princes and servants.
All right, so here we see an inflated ego and one that gets burst very easily. So Haman comes out of the party so ecstatic. The Bible says he goes forth with a joyful and a glad heart. Man, not just a joyful and a glad heart with a head blown up the size of the world. And he thinks, I am the man, until he walks by Mordecai. And Mordecai doesn't bow to him. And he's like, oh! And it crushes him. And you're like, well, that seems really silly, because the king had enriched Haman. He had given him power. He had given him authority. He had children. He had a wife. He had friends. But he didn't have this one thing. And it goes to show you, when you're on an ego trip, it's very hard for you to ever be satisfied or content. And if you think through God's word has a lot to say about contentment. Does God care that you have food? Yeah. Does he care that you have clothing? Yes, he doesn't want his children run around naked. As a matter of fact, he made the first clothes. But God cares about that, and he clothes you, and he feeds you, and everything else is grace upon grace. Okay? And so this guy goes, man, I got a lot of stuff, but I need that guy's head. Because what he has done is he's really put himself in the throne of his own heart, and he is his own God. Well, he's modeling after his leader. He thinks that he could be the next guy in line. And so, when he didn't get bowed to, he pitched a fit. So, his joy gets destroyed by jealousy, verses 12 through 13. Haman said, so he goes home. He tells everybody of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children. Verse 12, Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself. And tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Oh, very snooty. Yes. Yet all this availeth me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So there's a missing piece. You got all this stuff, but there's Mordecai, and that's the missing piece. And he's got to get out of here, because then everybody actually will respect me. But that one guy, get him out of here. Well, little does he know what's coming for him. His ego and his pride is getting inflated, but he has his entire joy crushed by jealousy. And that's a small picture for us. Guess what? You could be running around and there can be a ton of grace in your life. And then you have this thing in your life, and I don't know what it is, but you want it. And because you don't have it, it crushes you. And God's word gives us an illustration here and a reminder that we should, no matter what state we're in, just like Paul, learn to be content and to be grateful for the grace that God has shown us. And here's Mordecai going, I got a lot of stuff, but I don't have his respect, and therefore I will crush him. So his joy gets destroyed by jealousy. So one of the quotes that I ran across was that the soul was made for God, and nothing but God can fill and make it happy. In other words, yes, he was missing a centerpiece, but it wasn't Mordecai. You know what Haman was missing? The contentment that comes from God. And no matter what, no matter if he crushed Mordecai, would he be content? No. He's already jumped down that hole of resentment and envy, and so no matter what he had done, there would always be something in his life that would push him to want a little more. My guess is he would want the kingdom next. So there's the joy destroyed by jealousy, and then letter C, a sinister scheme. So here comes his wife.
I just have one thing, because right there, that really stuck out to me, where God warned us about, in his commandments, thou shalt not covet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big reason why.
Mm-hmm. And leads you to some places you don't want to be. Verse 14, then said Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high. What's it? Whatever 15 times 8 or 50 times 18 divided by 12 is, because 1 cubit is 18 inches. So over 50 feet, we're looking at over 60 feet. Okay? Chloe? 50 times 18 divided by 12? Okay. Day of rest. Mathematical Sabbath. So, make this gallows 60 feet high. And tomorrow speak unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou merrily with the king and unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. So, yes, ma'am.
Fun fact about the gallows, I actually was studying on Esther for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it talked about one of the lady elders. She said gallows back then they were hung and they would be dropped, and they were dropped on spikes, like these huge jagged spikes. It wasn't just they were hung by the neck; they were dropped, were impaled, and then slowly bled out.
Yep. So I'll read this here. The gallows mentioned here was not for hanging a victim, but for violently killing and displaying the victim. A pointed stake is set upright in the ground, and the culprit is taken, placed on the sharp point, then pulled down by his legs till the stake that went in at the fundament passed up through the body and comes out through the neck. It's a most dreadful species of punishment in which revenge and cruelty may glut the utmost of their malice. The culprit lives a considerable time in excruciating agonies. So he got a massive pointy stick, and he was going to put him on it and then pull him down. That was the gallows. It wasn't like Wild Wild West, where he was just going to get a bucket kicked out from under him. That was pretty... What's that? Yeah, it's not evil or sinister enough. So just when it seems like evil might win, God works in the night, and a sleepless king becomes an instrument in the hand of a sovereign God. But I'll say this before. You should never underestimate the distorting power of hatred. Okay? So when you begin to hate, envy, covet, and it begins to boil up inside of you, you will not think correctly. It's impossible. It distorts your ability to think godly. The same is true with pride and arrogance and hatred. So what happened in Haman's life, really, he was high on himself and his own ego and his own anger and his own cruelty, and he devises this thing so that he can satisfy himself. And guess what? That's the same type of hatred that made people want to crucify Jesus. And that's the same type of hatred which have made you scream, crucify him, if you were there. So you're like, I would never do that. Well, there was only 12 people that were following Jesus day in and day out. So you say, well, that hatred doesn't live in me. Well, make sure. Okay? Make sure you kill that yourself. As the Reformed people say, be killing the sin, or sin will be killing you. So, number 3, the providence of a sleepless king. Everybody sleep good last night? No? Me neither. My daughter, she's been having some sleep issues, and sometimes I think they're fake, and that they could be dealt with the spanking spoon. But I didn't do that last night. I just threatened, and it solved the problem. How about that? But I don't think you can do that as adults. Different sleeping problems, right? So what do you do when you have a sleeping problem?
I pray and call on Jesus.
You pray? You do what? Oh, that helps. Look at the baby monitor and yeah. We didn't have a baby monitor, but sometimes I just go in there and make sure she was breathing. We have to. It's just not an official monitor. So, anybody count sheep? You tried it? Anybody read? Okay. Anybody just scroll Instagram? Yes. TikTok? Maybe I'll go to sleep. Yeah, it's actually one of the worst things for you, but it's still fun. So the king didn't have Instagram back then, and he was having a hard night's sleep, and there we are in chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. So this particular night, After these massive gallows, weapons of mass pain have been developed, the king, chapter 6, verse 1 through 3, has a struggle sleeping. Adam, could you read those verses? Verse 1 through 3.
On that night could not the king sleep. He commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told that name, and Teresh, two king's chamberlains, keepers of the door, who sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, Honor and dignity. What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, There is nothing done for him.
All right. Spurgeon said King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, was a master of 127 provinces, but not a master of 10 minutes of sleep. So it doesn't matter how powerful you are, you still might have some issues. More money, also more problems, right? So here's the richest man in the known world, and he can't go to sleep. So what does he do to calm himself? He doesn't look at the baby monitor. He's got too many babies. He doesn't look at Instagram because there's no phone. He actually has his servants come in, and he brings records. And he goes, hey, read me some of the records. And so they come in there, stand by his bed, and he's just letting the records be read to him. Now, if you'll remember a couple chapters ago, Mordecai had done what? All right, he had overheard a plot to kill the king, and he reported it. Esther really saves the king's life, and now this is being reminded him as he reads through these records. Now, the Persians were excellent at keeping records, and remember why they kept those records?
They didn't reward immediately.
Right, so they didn't immediately reward, perhaps because it could have been, sometimes time needs to go on so you can make sure everything is true, but also because there's a lot of things going on, right? And so he rewards because he wants to subsidize people that are going to be loyal to him. And when he hears this reminder that, hey, Mordecai was loyal to you, he actually saved your life, what do you think he does? He goes, what's been done to him? How has he been treated? Have we helped this guy out? This dude actually saved my life. Thanks for reading that part. I'm glad I stayed up for this. And so he goes, okay, here's what's going to be done. Verses 4 through 5. Verse 4 through 5, yeah. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court to the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So the king, who's having a tough night's sleep, goes, hey, is there anybody in the court out there? And guess who it was? Haman, the arch enemy of the guy that he just read about and was about to reward. And verse 5, and the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, oh, let him come in. So a perfectly timed interruption, if you will. So just as a reminder, Esther wasn't just lucky, right, to be queen. Mordecai wasn't just lucky to have overheard the assassination plot. This all wasn't luck, it was God's hand. It wasn't luck or chance that made Haman enter the royal courts at this time either. All of these events were orchestrated by God. So, here we have a perfectly timed interruption. A writer that I was studying says, this becomes difficult, of course, when bad things happen. So everybody's okay with God writing the script of the ultimate story, the positive things in their life, right? It's when there's bad things that happen to you that you have these issues. It's easy to see God's management of all things when we see good things happen, but what about the bad? Even then, we must still trust God's plan. realizing that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. We understand, that's Romans 8:28. We understand that Paul says all things work together. That doesn't mean all things work together the way we want them to. Okay? If I could explain something real in detail to you, that would be it. Your life doesn't have to go how you want it to in order for God to be good and for God to use you. Right? So God is still involved in this situation. We understand that Paul says all things work together. Any one event. So will you have bad things happen to you in life? If you take any bad thing that happens to you in your life and you establish that as God's moment of his character on your life, then you have a bad view of God. Okay? So any one event taken in isolation may seem to make no sense, but when we see all things working together, we can see the ultimate wisdom of God. And here's the truth about it. You may not ever get to see the entire tapestry that God's weaving with your life. It's just true. You may not ever get to see it. And your life may look radically different than you think it should be. But God is still at work. I think of Corrie ten Boom. She was in multiple death camps, concentration camps, and God's used her mightily. She's not alive anymore, right? But her story and her faith has inspired thousands, hundreds of thousands to follow Christ. And so she didn't get to see that, but she was faithful. And so that's our job, to be faithful, even when we can't see the entire picture. So what follows after Mordecai, or after Haman comes in, is one of the greatest reversals in all of the Bible, okay? Other than maybe rising from the dead. So here's what happens. Verse 6. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, What shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor? So Haman, full of himself, gets giddy. So the king just asked, hey, if I wanted to honor somebody, what would I do? So, in other words, it could be like this. You go into your dad, you know your birthday's coming up. And he's like, hey, what should I do for a young man whose birthday is about to come up? And you go, well, Dad, obviously you should buy him a new vehicle. You should take him to a Braves game. You should, give him a couple of gift cards of $500. And then he goes, all right, cool, I'll give it to Corbin. And you're like, what? So here's what happens. Haman goes, oh, what should you do? I'll tell you what you should do. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man with all whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim him before him. Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. So here's what you should do, O king. You should take your robe and your crown and your best horse. You should put it on that guy who you want to honor. Thinking, let me get warmed up. I might even be able to take your place. And so then parade him around and let everybody look at him and let him get the glory and the honor for this deed. And so verse 10, then the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse as thou hast said, do even so to Mordecai the Jew. Could you imagine anyone ever feeling smaller than that? I was going to kill him. But now I got to make sure that he gets all my stuff that was supposed to be for me. I thought you were talking about me. And that sitteth at the king's gate, let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. In other words, remember all those details you were giving me? Make sure you get all those details from Mordecai. A plan meant for self that honors another. Let her be a humbling parade. Then took Haman the apparel, the horse, the arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor." Hey y'all, look at this guy. If the king wants to honor you, you can be that cool. Look at it. And he has to explain to people why Mordecai is arrayed like a king. And then you can imagine how he's feeling. A little bit small. So let her see a foreboding prophecy. Verse 12 through 14. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning and having his head covered. So he puts on his black hoodie and he mopes, all the way back to his house. And he cries to his wife. And Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him. "Oh, I'm down in the dumps. I had to parade Mordecai around. It's the worst thing ever." Then said his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, unto him, "If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but thou shalt surely fall before him." And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. So here's what happens. He goes home, he tries to get some comfort, and they go, "Oh, bro, you don't even know what's about to happen to you. This is not going to be good." So his wife, who had encouraged him to kind of kill this guy, goes, "I think something way worse is about to happen to you. And you might want to be prepared." And before the end of the thought in the Bible, the next thing that happens is, "Hey, you're invited. You remember you had an appointment with the king and the queen. It's time for your party." And so we'll stop there this week. Thank y'all for listening.